Hi, this is Frank Spino. I want to welcome all of our friends from FabrianoInAcquarello to our home here in Melbourne, Florida, in the southern United States of America. Today we're going to take a tour of my studio. We're going to look at some of the tools I use and techniques I employ. It's going to be fast-paced and we're going to cover a lot of territory. I hope whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, you'll find something useful here. Before we do that, we're going to take a quick walk around our home. There's some interesting points I'd like to make, and this will help me illustrate them. Stay tuned, you'll see what I mean. I want to thank Anna and the good folks at FabrianoInAcquarello for this opportunity to share this video with you today. It is an honor and a privilege to be asked to participate. And lastly, I want to say that I feel fortunate just to be able to paint. God gave me talent, yes. I feel compelled to use it. But I also have the luxury of time and the means to accomplish this. Others are not as fortunate. And in this time of pandemic, I'm glad I have something to give my energy to. Watercolor. So, come on along, let's get started. Front hall, we have a series of paintings I call circles and squares. And this is a tiny sketch I did in Orvieto, Italy. But I didn't invite you here to describe every one of my paintings. This is Susan's office. She has the best view in the house. For this month, she has chosen to hang a series of paintings with red grapes to adorn her office. With the use of our gallery hanging system, she can change out an entire room of paintings in minutes. We'll be talking about that in a second. And yes, she has a bar cart, desk, and credenza that all fit nicely into our comfortable mid-century modern home. How do you hang 78 paintings in a 1,600 square foot home? Very carefully. The key for us has been a gallery hanging system. They aren't cheap, but the truth is, we wish we had purchased them years ago. They have been a godsend. No more pounding nails in the walls, or hanging a painting too high or too low because you don't want to make a new nail hole just for it. This hanging system makes moving paintings easy. Have to take a painting to a show, grab another one and put it in its place in seconds. I can move a painting up or down, left or right, in no time at all. We chose the Gallery 1 system, a stainless steel cable system, but there are many choices. You will notice the camera keeps raising towards the ceiling. That's to show the hanging tracks, which screw to the wall. Once that's up, you're living on Easy Street. The reason you see so many paintings here in the hall is twofold. First, since you're in such tight quarters, you can't really get a good look at them anyway, so bunching a lot of them together doesn't really matter. And two, hanging them keeps them safe. They aren't slid under a bed or leaning against the wall somewhere where they can get damaged. We think that hanging is the safest way to store them. I spend most of my time in my studio, but it's very important to step back and take a look at your work from a different perspective. So I bring my work into the living room and set it on the bookcase for review. I usually take a notepad with me and jot down things that need adjusting. Very often, almost immediately, I see problems that I didn't see when I was right on top of it at my painting table. For this piece, which is in progress at the time of making this video, I see I don't want the green lily pads at the bottom left to be so prominent. I had fun with the colors when I was painting them, but now I see that they compete too much with the first big yellow and red lily pad in the foreground on the right. That is where I want your eye to go first. So I will tone down the green ones. And now that I see it on the bookcase, I think the stone bridge needs to fade back more into the background. It too is competing with where I want your eye to go first. On top of that, the foliage in the top right quadrant needs organization. There's more work to be done. This is the benefit of the bookcase. Over the years, I've ended up with a drawer full of different sized mats. I like to buy mat board that is black on the good side, so you have black on one side and white on the other. I will pull one out or rig something to fit as I have done here and sit and look at it. This has a number of benefits. First, it blocks out distractions. I get a better idea of what the finished piece is going to look like. But something more important happens, and I offer up that you might give a little thought to it. Every painting you or I do is two-dimensional and has 4 edges. Too obvious? I don't think so. The mat helps me to see how the elements inside my painting interact with these 4 edges. This is critical stuff for me. It has a lot to do with the mechanics of how the eye moves through the painting. I also enjoy discovering how the piece looks with a white or a black mat. I'm often surprised at what a difference it makes. Long before we purchased the hanging system, all we had were some nails and a hammer. You don't have to guess if there are any extra nail holes in this wall. Salon-style hanging is wall-to-wall and floor-to-ceiling. It was difficult to compose and difficult to hang, but we are now able to enjoy 15 paintings, many by other artists, hung in a safe environment.
This is Susan Malin Brown, Frank's wife. I'd like to talk just a minute about the art environment. As a volunteer docent, I learned that 68 to 70 degree temperature and 50% humidity is required in most museums. It made me curious about the humidity in our home. I bought a $10 hygrometer and learned, shockingly, that the humidity in our home was reliably 70%. Despite having updated 2-stage modern air conditioning, we still needed to have an additional dehumidifier. We now maintain a safe 50% humidity in our home. My office has a large south-facing glass wall. Mid-mornings to mid-afternoon, I close the blind to keep harsh sunlight off of the many paintings in there. Frank has done research on watercolor light fastness so that he recommends reducing direct exposure to UV.
Welcome to the artist's studio. Not really, it's just a spare bedroom. For years, I worked at a little table in a corner with a lamp, and that was fine. And then we reorganized, and now I feel very fortunate to have this 12 by 14 foot room. It does have high ceilings, which makes it feel more spacious. But first, my wife wants to thank you for this video. She hasn't seen this room this clean in years. First thing you notice when you walk in are the white walls. There's a fancy term I've heard lately. It's called color bias. I want a neutral background around me when I paint, so nothing influences the colors that I choose. And you'll also notice that I keep the walls pretty bare to cut down on visual distractions. This chair is a recent acquisition. It's really great. I should have bought one a long time ago. I got it from a used office furniture store. This is my paint table. It pivots vertically and adjusts in height. Over on the left you see a hairdryer, and behind it a yellow plastic ruler that doesn't leave marks. I paint from a monitor. It sits on a movable platform which is mounted to the wall. I'm right-handed, so over on the right you see a hand towel to absorb water off my brush, a paper towel to absorb paint off my brush, and a sheet of white paper that I use to test mixtures of paint from my palette before I place them on my painting. And this is what I call my workstation. Actually, it is a rolling mechanics tool chest that I got on sale at the local Sears store before it closed. My wife liked it so much she ran out and bought a second one to use as her rolling sewing station. There you see a 42 well plastic palette from Creative Mark. I own a number of them for different reasons. I change out my colors depending on whatever I'm painting. Some colors do remain constant. This is a typical layout of paint. I have another one that favors landscape colors, and another that has large wells for when I'm using bigger brushes. And I have a fake one that is squeaky clean that I take to demos. I've cut up a plastic storage container to create this contraption that holds my brush tips in water all day. I often use a dozen brushes at once, and this keeps them from drying out. This little piece of rubber shelving liner keeps the brushes from sliding into the water. Here's a closer look if that wasn't very clear. I keep my brush tips in water all day, never deeper than the ferrules or the handles will come apart. This is the bottom of a plastic container that I cut up and put two slots in that slip over the sides of the water bowl to keep it in place. As far as mask goes, I'm quite happy with this Winsor Newton colorless masking fluid. And this is an older bottle of Shiva mask cleaner that I dip my masking brushes into before I begin. Over on the right are the brushes I am using on my current painting. Here's a short piece on brushes. Long ago, there was a time when brushes felt strange and awkward to hold. But now, after a couple of decades as a sign painter and a billboard painter, they have become an extension of my hand. I want to say at the outset, use whatever works for you. I think we adapt to what we have. So, then, what should I buy? There are so many choices. You have relatively inexpensive synthetic bristle brushes, and then there are the more expensive brushes made from animal hair. I use all kinds of brushes, and I'm always eager to try new ones. My suggestion is, try as many as you can. Should you spend the big bucks on that Kolinsky sable? I would say yes, at least once, when you feel ready to take that step. See how it works for you. I had to have someone taunt me into buying my first Escoda Reserva, and then the light bulb went off, and now I own many, and I thank that person. I have a lot of brushes. Last count, I had around 250. I use them all, but for different purposes. I use brushes. They are my most important tool. Brushes come in all kinds of materials and shapes, and each will perform a different task. Here are just a few. The first one on the left is for washes and loose painting. The second is a fine all-round shape. And the third will give a very sharp point for fine detail. On the right are two flat brushes with square shapes, but the left one is going to give a softer stroke compared to the hard, chisel-edged brush on the right. It depends on what you're trying to do. Here is a squirrel hair mop brush, and then a brush that makes lines, known as a rigger. Third is an inexpensive brush I use for utility work, like cleaning my palette. And lastly, an older brush that I've butchered with a razor and scissors to produce controlled splotches. Look at how these two expensive Kolinskis are built. Length and width of the bristles and the manner in which they are hand-shaped are important factors. You will often find specifications for the length and width of the bristles or brush head listed when you are considering a purchase. Look at how they shape up when dampened. You're going to get a different stroke out of them. Here's a recent discovery I've come across, recent for me at least. I have a tight, realistic approach, and I've always used short-handled brushes that give me the tight control I need. Recently, I've begun experimenting with long-handled brushes. I find they cause me to paint with more freedom and expression in my strokes. And lastly, here are my stiff nylon scrubbers that I use to lift paint. And two very hard-edged brushes I call my erasers. They can lift a pretty sharp line or get back a lost edge. I do a lot of lifting. I think one thing that separates me from other artists is that I'm not afraid to change things. This can be quite a challenge. Spontaneity is good in watercolor, and it's easy to mess things up when reworking, but it can be done, and I'm pretty good at it. I think I am inclined to rework because of a couple of things. As a youth, I began with a pencil and later charcoal. Charcoal is a wonderful medium because you can put it down and lift it up and put it down again. In color, I began painting in oils using a palette knife. If things weren't going well, you would scrape it off and start again until you got it right. In business, like billboard painting, I didn't get paid until I satisfied the customer with a recognizable image. Now, in watercolor, it is the way I am, and I quit fighting it. I am a realist. I will work something until I get it the way I want it. But now, back to the workstation. In the first drawer are the tools I use every day: a pencil, pen, ruler, razors, some handy masking pens I'm experimenting with. There's the white paper which I use for seeing my mixed colors. The second drawer holds my paints, and I'll talk about them shortly. The third drawer you can't see. It holds super secret stuff like this tube ringer and masking tape and other magic tools that give me an unfair advantage. The truth is, it's just a mess, and I didn't bother to clean it. But back to the second drawer, here's a little piece on my pigments. Color. You gotta love it. If you don't, I think you may be watching the wrong video. At last count, I had around 150 tubes of paint. Why so many? I'm interested in paint and want to learn as much as possible and want to know what pigments are out there. I mainly use Holbein, Winsor Newton, and Daniel Smith, and have been working a lot lately with Golden's core colors, but I've tried many others. Is one clearly better than the rest? I'd say the differences are minor. They're all good. I use different pigments for different reasons, depending on their characteristics, which are dependent on the pigment, much less on the manufacturer. First, what is their hue or color? Are they granulating? Are they transparent or opaque? I have use for both. Are they light fast or permanent, or are they going to fade? For the most part, I stick to permanent colors because I want my paintings to look the same 100 years from now. Are they staining colors? Can I lift them up again? I make a lot of changes. And if the pigment stains, I tend not to use it. There is useful information on every tube of paint that you pick up. The color index name, sometimes referred to as the CI name. Here, PY stands for pigment yellow, PG for pigment green, PO for pigment orange, and so on. Is it a single pigment? Or is it a mix of many, like pigments blue, black, and violet? Common names may vary. The pigment in these two tubes is PY154, essentially the same color. You get a good idea of what's in the tube by referring to its color index name. And there's often more information there on the tube, like how transparent is it, the light fast rating. But you can also get that information from the manufacturer's color charts. Two amazing resources I own are Michael Wilcox's exhaustive, if dated, The Wilcox Guide to the Best Watercolor Paints, and Hilary Page's Guide to Watercolor Paints. Handprint.com has an amazing amount of information about pigments. It's a great resource that I rush to when I have questions about color, and they cover a lot of other topics. You might take a look at handprint.com. With time, practice, and study, my understanding of pigments continues to grow. Behind my workstation sits this little unassuming cork board. This is where I pin up my paintings to photograph them. I use a Canon 6D on a tripod. I've purchased two Lowell Todalites and tripods to hold them at 45 degrees to the painting. I pin up a Tiffin color control patch for every watercolor I shoot. It's the only way I know to maintain accurate color. One of the biggest issues in photographing your work is lighting. The other is the settings you pick on your camera, mainly the white balance. Every camera has them, and they can wildly affect the color outcome in your photograph. I could talk a long time about photography, but the biggest tips I could share were given to me by a real photographer and a great watercolorist, Matthew Bird. Use a tripod. You may already have a tripod for plein air, and it will work great for photography too. Every camera can screw directly to a standard tripod, or you could purchase a quick release plate system that is similar to the one that holds your easel. Mount it to your camera and attach it to your tripod. Then, when you're not hand holding your camera any longer, use the camera's timer so there won't be any shaking. Even the most inexpensive cameras have timers. Here is one of the greatest assets I own, my flat file cabinets. This is actually two cabinets stacked together. They measure 35 by 46, and I don't know how I ever lived without them. They hold my finished watercolors, they keep my paper safe, hold my watercolor blocks, and so much more. I have a smaller one that doubles as a nightside table. They aren't just handy, they are almost indispensable. I've accumulated a lot of books and catalogs over the years, and it's always a challenge to find a place to store them. We built these sturdy, out-of-the-way shelves, which help. Over here on my desk is my Macintosh computer. I'm very handy with Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. I use them on the front end for sorting, cropping, and adjusting photographs, and on the back end for filing and archiving all of my work, and a whole lot more. These are some filing cabinets which hold an assortment of goods, and last but not least, a system of wire shelves and plastic bins that represent some of the smartest money I've ever spent. And now, here's a little piece on lighting. I am not the last word on lighting. This just works for me, in my studio. How much light is right? For me, the right amount is just enough. I don't work in the dark, but I do work with the minimum amount of light necessary. And the reason for that is the effect light has on my monitors. I paint from monitors. For years I worked from this Macintosh. Great tool, but not for painting. This monitor is glass, and that glass reflects light and color. Can you see me taking this picture? I should have combed my hair. This light and color blends, bounces up and interferes with the color I'm trying to see on the monitor. I found this to be quite a problem. Then I purchased a second monitor, which has a fabric screen. Less reflections, but still an issue. That's me waving at you. Ambient light on or around my paint table causes glare, which interferes with what I am trying to see. I've turned on more lights. That's me waving at you and holding up a camera to take this photo. So, I keep my lights only as bright as I need them, no more. And that is why I work on this non-reflective black surface. I spent a fair amount of money and time installing this track lighting system, and now I only use it for utilitarian purposes like cutting mats. After I installed it, I found it is really too much light for the reason I just mentioned, and the unforeseen issue that its 5 bulbs cast 5 shadows. My main tool is this Alvin brand clamp-on swing arm combination light. I like its flexibility, and it has a second light, which I don't use for painting, but can add extra light when needed. I also use this inexpensive clamp-on to light my palette. Of course, I have some natural light and 4 bulbs overhead on the ceiling. Let's talk about the light bulbs that I use. The light of a bulb can fall anywhere on a scale from warm yellow to cool blue, which can affect your work. This color, or color temperature as it is called, light appearance on this product, is measured on the Kelvin scale. That's Kelvin. So you'll see it as a K number, which stands for Kelvin. I use a 5000 K bulb, which puts it close to the middle of that color temperature scale. 5000 K, that's the temperature I like. Lumens measures how bright it is. Lumens, like illumination, you get it. This bulb has 850 lumens, not real bright, and the wattage is 14, on the low side. You might want more or less lumens. An important tool that I've been using ever since I started watercolor, I call my color notes. When I'm working on a piece, I'll have a spiral bound pad next to me, nearby, especially in the beginning. After I get started, it's not so critical. But what I'll be doing, I'll be trying to work out the colors that I want to use, and I'll be mixing them. I mix them on the palette. I also keep a piece of white paper next to me, so I can actually see what I've got on here. And if I like it, I might put a little swatch, a little dab of color here on my notepad. And then I might note what it was. Was it a combination of 2 or 3 pigments, solo pigment? This kind of grew out of I'm retired now, but I used to work, and when I worked, I could only really get into painting on Saturdays. On Saturday morning, I'd get up and shirk all my other duties. My wonderful wife Susan did everything for me, and I would get up and I would paint until I dropped 10, 12, 14 hours. And then I found week after week, I'd be into these complicated paintings and I wouldn't know which pigments I'd used. So I started keeping notes, and I could look back and say, oh, this is a combination of X, Y, and Z. So that's where it all began. None of these were ever meant to be seen by anyone. They're just my notes. Some are simple, and some are quite extensive. Here's a close-up of a typical note. I have developed a sort of codification. The first note on the top left used CY, cadmium yellow. I'm not using cadmium as much these days, but that's for another video. The CY is mixed with NV, Holbein mineral violet, to neutralize it. Holbein shadow green is added to give it a greener cast, and Winsor orange red to warm it. You can see my X through it. I didn't like this color. To the right, you follow an arrow to a spot where I've added more mineral violet and more Winsor orange red, and so on. So I make these notes for my paintings, and they come in very handy. Here are a few examples. I use these colored notes if I should decide to paint a similar subject matter. They have saved me countless hours when I want to recreate the same color mixes that I've already done in the past. Hand in hand with my color notes are my color studies. Before I jump into something big, I will work on color notes, and often I will work up very quickly a small version to see how I like the colors I've chosen. I call these my color studies. Well, this one doesn't have much color. I want to make any major changes to my color palette now before I get too deeply into a full-size painting. Some are simple, some are more complex. These are about half of the studies I did for one painting, and I was never satisfied with the final piece. Maybe I studied too long. One unforeseen benefit of these small, quick paintings is that I don't spend a lot of time on them, so I don't overwork them, as I'm prone to do. As we all know, quick is good in watercolor. Many of them have turned out quite nicely and have been suitable for framing. Just for scale, this Tiffin color control patch that you see on the right is 8 inches long. I include one in every photo shoot for color correction. You can see I was so pleased with this color study for Transparent Lemon that I signed it and then painted it full size. This is a full sheet. And this is a tiny color study for Bronze Water Lilies. And then the finished piece, which is 13 inches by 41. Here's something that I stumbled across while working with my color notes. For lack of a better title, I call it visual proportions. So in the beginning of a new painting, I'm working on color notes and choosing the pigments for my palette. My palette changes with each painting depending on what I'm doing. And I started to try to visualize, using the colors I've chosen, what the finished piece will look like. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Here's an example. This simple procedure can actually affect the colors I choose to use. Doing this, I can get a glimpse of what the finished piece will look like hanging on a wall. Here's a visual proportion of a little painting I did for my wife for our anniversary. Susan is partial to Black-Eyed Susans, the flower. With this visual proportion, I had a rough idea of how my color choices would affect the outcome of the finished piece. This last one was done for a major piece I just finished. The working title is In the Hammock. I think you can see how the use of these visual proportions can help me get some idea of what the finished piece of art might look like. I've talked about my color notes and their benefits. This leads to the culmination of their usefulness, the tremendous asset they become when I'm painting in series. What is a series? It's a number of paintings with a similar or the same subject matter, or that uses a similar approach, or something that ties them all together. Mine often spring out of photo sessions where I use a number of similar photos for a group of paintings that have at heart the same source. I enjoy painting in series because it lets me explore a subject more deeply. And an interesting and unexpected byproduct of painting in series is that they look really great when they hang side by side on the wall. Here are just a few of the color notes I made for a series I call Circles and Squares. You can see I was working on different shades of green. You can also see me working out a progression of colors that will be used for the citrus in this series. Here's the color study I made for the first painting. I wanted to be sure I was pleased with my color choices. Take a close look at the green squares here and compare them to the finished piece, and you will see I've come a long way in refining their color. This is Circles and Squares 1. In this series, I investigate the interaction between the circular orange globes and the green checkerboard squares on the tablecloth. There's a lot at work here. The orange circles of the calamundan, a tiny citrus fruit that grows in our yard, and the green squares, as seen from above, almost lose their objective reality and become graphic elements that play against each other. The diagonal pressure of the squares lined up seem to push the calamundans across and off the page. While on the page, they appear to huddle and nest on top of and inside the large square of the glass vase. All of these elements seem precariously balanced on the dark shadow cast by the vase. At first you don't notice, but there's a second set of colors needed for the shaded areas. Especially challenging were the white squares in shadow. When I began Circles and Squares 2, I said to myself, I'm going to paint this as quickly as possible. Quick is good in watercolor. I heard one artist put it this way: plan carefully, paint quickly. It isn't hard to understand how having my palette worked out ahead of time allowed me to move more swiftly through this painting. It was so much easier since I didn't have to give one thought to which color I would reach for next. I already had them all worked out. Plus, being the second in a series, I had already completed an entire painting on the same subject. I wanted to put this down as fast and fresh as possible. I can feel the spontaneity in this painting. For Circles and Squares 3, I took a calmer and more measured approach. In this tranquil horizontal setting, I investigate how these rectangular shapes work with the four edges of the painting. And I was very interested in the rendering of the glass. I wanted to make it look like you were seeing the fruit on the left through the glass. A while back, I got interested in the intense color of the fauvists. With this in mind, I went looking for something colorful to paint. Here are just a few of the color notes I made for a series I did with mangoes and some other fruit. And this is a study I did with those color notes. The scissors are there to show scale. This is the finished piece. It measures 20 by 14. I was very pleased with it. The next one has a square format and is a little bit warmer, but essentially has the same palette. And here's a third. I did 6 in this series. Here's a bunch of grapes I had fun with. I've always liked this piece. The grapes are laying in a cut glass bowl, well, mostly in. Everything is sitting on two similarly colored fabrics. Same bowl, same grapes, same fabric. In this third one, I used a different bowl, but everything else is pretty much the same. And finally, here are three pieces that have very similar color schemes. This is a close-up of half an orange in a vintage glass juicer. And the bowl again. You might have noticed by now, I'm a little short on glassware, so they get reused a lot. And the same colors again. I was very pleased that this painting, Make an OJ, was chosen for the cover of the hardbound collection Splash 14, Light and Color. It isn't hard to see how useful my color notes can be when working in series. Here's a form I would like to share with you. I put it together in Adobe Illustrator, but you could make it many other ways, even by hand. I call it my show log. Whether you're submitting to one show or many, it can be very difficult to stay on top of all the important information. At the top, I put the name of the show and date I began filling this out. Under that is the date I submitted to the show. What was the submission deadline? When will I be notified if I'm accepted? What are the dates of the show? Is there an opening? What's the dates for delivery, for pickup? There are many costs involved in shows, and I list them here. Down toward the bottom is some critical information. Which pieces did I submit? Here's the title, and the month and year they were created. Their image size, and the size framed. Are they for sale? How much did I ask? Which one was accepted? Who was the juror? And then I print it out on colored paper so it stands out from all the other white paper floating around on my desk. And I file it in a named folder in my file cabinet. I rely on this form. Here's a spreadsheet I couldn't live without. I call it my art data. I've been keeping it for many years. It is indispensable. This is where I log all the paintings I've done. This shows the year 2020, the year the pandemic began. We've all been staying home more, and I've logged a number of paintings so far this year. Over on the left you see the month I finished them, then the title, the substrate or paper used. Does this painting use a white or opaque pigment? That's for TWSA, the Transparent Watercolor Society of America. What's the image size? And what is the frame size? You can see that my framer is going to be very busy. Has it been in a show? What was it priced at? Over here are the dates I photographed the piece. My studio goes from being one for painting to one for photography. I set up my lights and my tripod, and as you can see, I shot a number of them at one time, in one session. And these are the dates. This helps me see if I photographed the piece yet, and the dates help me access the files more quickly. As I scroll up, you can see that I've been using this for many years, since the beginning. And it is critically important. It holds my art data.
Hi, my name is Susan Malin Brown, and I am Frank's wife, and I help him with the logistics in his art business. I'd like to talk today about the scheduling Excel spreadsheet that we use. It's very helpful to us to make sure that we make all the deliverable dates for the various shows. At one point, Frank had as many as 12 concurrent shows, and managing all those dates individually is difficult without a spreadsheet. If you look at the bottom left, there's a legend of the items that we care about. We care about the submit date for the show, the notify date, when you're notified whether or not you're in the show, the shipping date, when the painting must be shipped, the open or the publish date, if it's a magazine or a book, the open of the show. The opening, we use that to denote an event that you want to attend, the close date of the show, and the pickup date or the shipping return date of the painting. All of those items are always clearly identified in a prospectus. So that's the origin of all of that information. When we are filling out this spreadsheet, at the top left you'll see this is the name of the show. I've just given them quote, fake names, except for the FWS line, but just an example so you can see how the spreadsheet flows out. Painting, I've also given them all fake names. Sometimes the painting, you only submit one, sometimes you can submit 2 or even 3 paintings. If a painting name is grayed out, that means it was not selected for that show. To the right of paintings, you'll see the year and many months labeled, columns all the way over, and this is where we put the dates of the relevant items that we have to track. Let's talk about row 11, which is FWS. FWS is an online-only show this year, and since that so significantly impacts the deliverables, we put the online show in there, and you can see that 2 paintings can be submitted to FWS. In the next cell, I put the name of the 2 paintings and keep moving forward over to the months, and on the 15th of August, the paintings had to be submitted to FWS. On the 10th of September, we were notified whether or not Frank was in the show, and on the 19th of September, the online show opens. So that's how we fill out the show, but its daily use is by the month. So let us look at column I, which is September of 20. So on a daily or weekly basis, I'll look at this row for this, column for this month and see what's due. And here we can tell on the 10th, we're going to be notified by FWS whether or not Frank's in there. And on the 19th, we'll know that the show opens. On the 5th, we'll be notified whether or not Frank got in a local show number 2 with painting number 10. And on the 30th of September, we know that we have a deadline to submit to the International 1 show. So that's how we use this spreadsheet on a daily or weekly basis to keep us on track for all the deliverables that are out there. Anyway, I hope you'll find this useful, and it's been very valuable for Frank and I. We've had a good track record of being able to meet dates, and that's because we're managing the concurrent shows with this tool. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing this time in our home and for your interest in my work. You can see more at www.frankspino.com. I'm certain that with diligence and time spent with brush in hand, you will find your artistic vision. Happy painting.